There is always a question when you start a new business or a small scale business. There is always a question in your mind that what happen if you fail? So we are going to discuss about but what if I fail, right? This is always the question comes in your mind. So I want to give you just a little bit uh, the idea what you need to do if it is so. How to succeed even if your roof caps in on you. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. This is the statement which is given by the Steve Jobs, the CEO of Apple. Almost everyone we have met in the book so far has some kind of failure to success story. In many cases, the story is about a product launch that fails flat, a partnership gone wrong, or the loss of motivation for the wrong project. I tried something and it didn't work out. But then I moved on to someone else is a common refrain. All these stories are valid and interesting, but I have never heard a rise from the ashes story quite as compelling as that of John T. Anger. A sculpture artist from a small town in Miachen, John's story is a tour de force of failure and fear that turned into resilience and success. As John tells it, the third best thing that ever happened to him was having the roof of his studio collapse from under him while he was standing on it, frantically trying to shovel snow. The building was completely destroyed, and John spent the rest of the matching winter alternating between the shivering while he worked and warming himself with an illegal unvented kerosene heater. It was a nightmare scenario, but then a funny thing happened. The bank came out to assess the damage and gave him a $10,000 commission. John used the commission as a down payment on two buildings he had been trying to purchase for a while. I don't think the bank would have gone for the deal without the disaster. He says it forced them to take a real look at my business instead of them just thinking of me as another broke artist. The second best thing that ever happened to John was losing his last day job as a graphic designer during the dot-com crash of 2000. The loss of the job led to the loss of everything else, his income, girlfriend, his apartment, and even a piece of his thumb in an accident incurred while he was moving out of the apartment. While he was working the day job 7 days a week in 1999, even 7 days total in 2000, he also was working as much as 10 hours a day on his art business. After both of these experiences, losing the building and losing the day job, John was depressed and thought hard about what to do next. His friends advised him to stuck it up and find work wherever he could, but in rural Miach in those days, John knew that there wasn't much work to be found. It was now or never. So he stuck with his goal and continued making progress. The best thing that ever happened to John, as he tells the story, was a late night disagreement with a crazed cab driver who pulled him into the back room of a dinner and held a gun to his head for a full 10 minutes, screaming and threatening to pull the trigger. John finally escaped and walked out into another cold, matching night, sweating, trembling, and glad to be alive. I get it, John yelled at the sky as he hobbled away. I'm just so lucky. You don't really worry about the small things after that, John says. Now everything takes on a whole other levels of meaning. Much of this book contains various forms of advice, but Do not confuse advice for permissions. You don't need anyone to give you permission to pursue a dream. If you have been waiting to begin your own $100 startup or anything else, stop waiting and begin. Charlie Fabot, a Seattle-based designer who left the corporate world to go it alone, said that the best thing he did was learn to ignore advice, even from friends who meant well. My business and the life I lead now would never have happened had I not been obnoxiously stubborn to my own will. He said the fact is that the majority of people don't own their own business, and a certain percentage of that majority will not be happy or supportive about your exciting the 9 to 5 world. While usually well-meaning, the unsolicited advice from people who think they know better can be unnecessary and distracting. Here's how Sally and Victory, the founder of a Danish food tour businesses, puts it. The biggest lesson I learned was to trust my own judgment. When I started my tour business, I got all sorts of advice from people around me, ranging from why it would not work at all to how things should be run on a day-to-day basis. I had researched it and knew it was a viable idea, so I decided to keep my own counsel and quit asking people what they thought. People who know less about the business than me do not get to make decision about it. I value input, but now I seek it out from people who have unique perspective about how I can improve. Something the best advice is none at all. If you know what you need to do, the next step is simply to do it. Stop waiting, start taking action. What are we afraid of? Towards the end of many follow-up discussion with most of the business owners, the profile in the books, I asked about their biggest fears, worries, or concern. All these people have been successful, earning at least $50,000 a year from their project. Many were earning much more, but what were they worried about? What kept them up at night? Their concern fit into two broad areas: external and internal. External concern tended to relate to money and a changing marketplace. For example, a few businesses had been created to exploit imbalance in technology. These projects can be very profitable for a time, but when the music stops playing, the ride is over. A business that grows primarily from strong Google rankings or good placement in the iTunes stores, favored by the gods of apples, as one person put it, is in danger of losing it all if fortune changes. Scott M. McCurran, who published the Alaska Coupon book, said he was closely watching the online coupon craze, considering ways to update the business to be more digital friendly. The role of competition was mentioned frequently, although in very different ways. Several people said they were not worried about what other businesses were doing because they found it more productive to keep moving forward with their own original work. Others did worry, especially about building something unique only to see it copied or stolen by a more established company. Marin Casnon, who makes children's clothing in a small partnership she runs with her cousins, illustrated these concerns well. Our biggest fear since the beginning is that our product will be knocked off and our prices will be undercut. We are covered by patents and trademark, but it still happens from time to time. However, I am a firm believer that I focus 100% on creating a quality product will rise to the top every time. We do not sidetrack on other projects. We focus on keeping our customers extremely satisfied. There is still a chance that I will walk into Target and see my design on their shelf under another company's name. We are just hoping to have a place in that market so they are truly competing with us and not selling from us. Those who had expanded by hiring employees tended to worry about making sure they had enough cash flow and recurring income to keep the payroll going. If you own a solo shop and business tightens up, you may be also to tighten up along with it. But if you owe people a fixed amount of money on a fixed scale, you can't do that. When business produce more than 200 million in annual revenue but earned only $60,000 in net income for the owner, in large part because of his high overhead of employing people and investing in infrastructure. Holly mentioned the mention in the Goldilocks principle, the ideas that success is found within certain margin and not at the extremes. I want the clients to get real value out of what we deliver, she said, but not at the expense of our bottom line. And I want the team to have enough work to live well, but not so much work that we are not living. Others worried about faking it or needed to keep the wheels rolling after the initial passion fade, faded away. My biggest fear is that my consulting and writing becomes a medical and said the else in the Stenify in the Colorado, success seems to be the ability to keeps going to keep the doors open. Lee, Lee Williams and the Demings in Costa Rica. We be careful of letting clients take your business in a direction that makes you hate your job, says the brilliant Alexander, one half of the husbands and the wives, their team running a marketing company in Hastings on Hudson, New York. The further you go down that road, the harder it will be to correct courses, and it's really hard to quit your job when it's your own company. Digging deeper, the fear and worries were more closely related to issues of identity. I love my work, someone said, but what if I love only the work, or what if the things I love no longer fun because now it's all work? Statements like these usually were followed by clarifying ones such as starting this business, no matter the eventual outcome, has been worth the energy, effort, and sacrifices it has taken thus far to get it off the ground. One of our case studies, and the Canadian manufacturer said, I used to be afraid to fail. I wanted concrete number telling me that we were not going to lose before I took the leap. But if nobody was going to die even in the absolute worst case scenario, then what the hell was I so afraid of? I have never looked back. A European designer was even more dramatic. Do you want to know? The honest truth, in the early days, I almost expected my business to be a failure. I believed that it had to be that way because it is the first business I have ever run. And I know the biggest success have the biggest failure behind them. It sounds preserved, but I almost wanted it to fail so I could look back and say, yep, that one failed, but I learned from it. Fortunately or not, his business is doing just fine the moment they knew it. As I reviewed thousands of pages of survey data and made countless follow up calls, I learned to ask people if the decision to start their business had been worth it. You might think that such a question is simplistic. Wouldn't most response be yes? Well, perhaps, but one of the best part of the study was hearing exactly how a group of diverse people answer this question. There was usually a story behind the affirmative answer, and the story often related to a particular day, event, or moment when they knew their business were going to work. As we come to the end of this journey, I thought you should hear from a few of them directly. Gary Life Booker Award and the FedEx of Virginia. I never thought that people would pay for the service that I offer. So the very first time I received a check in payment for services from my very first client, it hit me like a ton of bricks. There's real money on the table here. And when I saw a letter from that very first customer published in a magazine recommending my service, I realized that there was both appreciation and demand for what I was offering. Even with our excellent credit history, 2010 was a bad time in banking to ask for money. We didn't need much, but we could not swing it completely on our own. My husband John and I needed a small credit line to lease the buildings where we plan to house our interior design and framing design businesses. Unfortunately, the bank said no. Later that day, John was on the phone with the landlord of the building, telling him that we just were not going to be able to make it work and that he could release the building to the others interested party. As I heard him saying those words on the phone, I had an incredible surge of hopes, and I remember shouting, John, no, we have to give it another shot. Tell him we just need a few more days to try again. We will have to go back into the bank and make them hear us out. If they will just sit down and listen, they will believe in us. It totally worked. The bank did hear our plea, and we eventually got what we needed to get going. 2 years in, and we could not be more thrilled, but we almost accepted the fact that it was not meant to be and carried on with our lives. I'm so glad we put in more effort. It meant everything to us to give it one more passionate prayer. For me, it was when I signed a big client after flying out of the corporate offices, making a pitch, and getting a tour of the ground. When I got the call from his marketing VP that they wanted to go with me over a couple other agents they had met, that was the moment when I knew Launch Books was going to work. Truth be told, I didn't even know that I had any doubts about it working before that call because I had been an agent for more than 12 years already and knew what I was doing. But because of the way my employment worked at the old agency, I literally had to live with nothing, no income stream whatsoever from the 1,000 books I had sold while I was there. So I was literally starting from scratch, but when I got that call, I had this enormous feeling of relief and excitement was over me. And I just absolutely knew it was going to work. The funny thing was that the client ended up being an unbelievable jerk and pulled out of the book deal over repeated problems with the publisher, and he didn't like a mock over that. They put together and their preferences had that he actually followed the proposal we had sent them for the content. So rather than trying to work anything out, he just decided the publisher did not get it and pulled out. Then a little while later he had his assistant send me a termination letter without so much as a conversations, even though I had managed to generate a decent offer for what was a brutally difficult book to sell. I didn't matter. It didn't matter though I still had that first moment on the phone and never looked back. I have since been on my own and selling books for more than 10 years. My husband and I were traveling around Europe, and after I had been hit by a car, we were going to travel and then go back to Chile to tutoring until the booking stopped coming in and then go back to having a normal job. So we had been couch surfing to try and save money. But after a month and a half on the road, I was amazing room at the Maturin and decided to pay an ungodly amount to use the internet for 10 minutes. And that was when I saw the mail. It would be our second US wedding and our first wedding where I had quoted more than simply travel costs. The bride had decided to hire us and she was going to with our biggest packages of over $5,000. I freaked out. I called my mom and then I called my dad, screaming stupidly using the hotel phone, which ended up costing another $100. I should have paid for another 10 minutes of the internet and used Skype. I wasn't freaking out because of the money, though I was because for a bride to pay that amount of money to photographers who don't even live in her country requires a huge leap of faith, and that was when I realized that if there was one bride willing to hire us and fly us in, there were probably more. And I started to think that if we could work both in silence outside of the child. We could make this work, so we did. The big day for us was August 20, 2008, also known as the day when we realized our dreams of moving back to my partner's native Spain. When we set up the economy in England in 2005, it was with the aim of eventually being able to move back to Spain and run the business remotely. Although we were not sure how long this would take, we had set up we had set up a perfect infrastructures with cloud-based business management software, VoIP telephones, and so on. But the logistic of outsourcing was proving the biggest hurdle. We couldn't find a company that could deal with the complexity of 250 different products, most of which were labeled in Spanish. When we finally managed to set up the contracted logistics operations and drove away from the warehouses, knowing that we no longer had to do all the shippings ourselves, and that the following days we were getting on a boat to Spain, I knew we had achieved what we set out to do. As I traveled the world meeting our group of unexpected entrepreneurs, I heard story after story like these over and over. They echoed a similar theme. When we have these main uh, moments, hold on to them. They provide encouragement and positive reinforcement when times are hard. Before we close it out, let's look back at the key lessons of this book. First and most important, that quest for personal freedom lies in the pursuit of value for others. Get the right from the beginning, and the rest will be much easier. Always ask, how can I help people more? Borrowing money to start a business or going into debt at all is now completely optional. Like many of the people you met in this book, you can start your own micro businesses for $100 or less. Focus relentlessly on the point of convergence between what you love to do and what others people are willing to pay for. Remember that most core needs are emotional. We want to be loved and affirmed. Relate your products or service to attractive benefits, not boring features. If you are good at one thing, you are probably good at something else. Use the process of skill transformation to think about all the things you are good at, not just the obvious one. Find out what people want and find a way to give it to them. Give them the fist. There is no consulting school. You can set up shop and charge for specialized help immediately. Just remember to offer something specific and provide an easy way to get paid. Some businesses models are easier than others to start on a budget. Unless you have a compelling reason to do something different, think about how you can participate in the knowledge economy. Action beats planning. Use the one-page business plans and other quick start guide to get underway without waiting. Crafting an offer, hustling and producing a launch event will generate much greater results than simply releasing your products or service to the world with no fanfare. The first $1.26 is the hardest, so find a way to get your first skills as quickly as possible, then work on improving the things that are working while ignoring the things that were not working. By franchising yourself, well, so through partnerships, outsourcing, or creating a different business, you can be in more than one place at the same time. Decide for yourself what kind of business you would like to build. There's nothing wrong with deliberately staying small. Many of the subject of our stories did exactly that, or scaling up in the right way. It only gets better as you go along. When we last left off, Jim Stone, the coffee company, was opening the business in the Langston, South Carolina. Owners Jams and the Kills had moved the south from the settles and the kicked things off. What happened next? Did a flood of loyal visitors shows up right away? No, exactly. It was a tough start, settling into a community not familiar with specialty coffee. The shop grew up customers at a time with a focus on providing the personal experience and encouraging a repeat business. One weekend, James and his crew gave out coupons for a free coffee at a local golf tournament. A man stopped in to redeem his coupons and mentioned that he normally picked up his morning cup at the gas station, but was inspired to try something new. The next day he returned, saying it was the best cup of coffee he had ever had. A morning group began to gather most weekdays, consisting of regular from all kinds of backgrounds, a lawyer, a clearing-man, the computer guy, a mechanic, people who had used to buy instant coffee at the grocery store began making a special trip every week to pick up the superior stuffs at Jamestown's coffee company. Slowly but surely the business stabilized. James thought back on the encouragement he had received from well-meaning friends when he first told them about moving down south. You can't start a business during a recession, they said. You can't move across the country without a job. Most small businesses fail within 1 year. Almost all mom and pop restaurants fail within the first years. On succeed. On and on it went, and every time someone gave him a reason he could not succeed in what he had set out to do, he made another note in his non-planning folder, merely one more obstacles to overcome. Elsewhere, Jen and the Homer continued making their maps in Columbus, Ohio, expanding to wholesale accounts in addition to the direct sales with which they started. They were featured recently in an Expedia commercial and are thinking about opening up a boutique travel store as part of the next adventure. Carol Jasda and the Adam Baker produced two other mega sales, each one bringing in a six figures payday for themselves and their affiliates. I asked for their help in producing the launch for this book just as soon as they finished carrying the bags of cash to the banks. Brandon the Pierce was planning a family move to Malaysia. The business now brings in over $50,000 a month. Benny Lewis was still language hacking his way around the world, moving to the Istanbul for a press course in the Turkish. Next up, a planned attempt at learning the Mandarin Chinese in Taiwan. The Monedo, the Beyond courses started by the Andrea Sitchels and the Jens Lemons had served more than 5,000 participants, producing $500,000 in revenue for two partners. Betty Kelly's that $120,000 ebooks has become a $160,000 ebooks. His wife and continues to stay at home with the kids, and they are now completely debt free. Perhaps the most important lessons arrived in an email from the Emily Cavalier, who had recently left a high-paying job in the Manhattan to pursue Mouth of the Border, a tour and the events businesses focused on ethnic foods. I asked, I asked how often she still felt motivated to go it alone, and she told me every single day the greatest benefit has been going to bed just as excited as if not more excited than what I woke up. I get the work day in, day out on something that fully engages me and explicit not just my passion but the passion of tons of other people too. Yes, like Emily and everyone else in this book, you can do this too. You are not alone out there. Sure, you can learn through failures, and most likely you will have at least one false start on the road to freedom. But failure is overrated. Who says you will fail? You can just as easily succeed. You can apply the lessons from these stories and create the new life you want. So here the key points, if you ask me what are those, advice can be helpful, but you can also just step out and take a big leap. Don't wait for someone to give you permission. More than competition or other external factors, the biggest battle is against our own fear and inertia. Thankfully, this also means we are in complete control of managing it. When you have a success moment, you knew story, hold on it. These experiences are powerful and will help you later if times get hard.